A View to a Kill is the 7th and final Roger Moore James Bond movie, and I'm very excited to give you guys my review for this movie. If you've seen it, be sure to leave a comment of what you thought about this movie. As well, if you want to check out my reviews for the previous Bond films, I'll have a playlist up you can click on and go check those videos out. As well, be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Now let's get into this review. In this film, Bond recovers a microchip off the body of a fellow agent that leads him to a mad industrialist who plans to create a worldwide microchip monopoly by destroying California's Silicon Valley. That's the synopsis of this movie, and like I said, this was the final Roger Moore Bond film, and for me, unfortunately, this is his weakest one. This movie I find to be quite dull, actually. The best thing about this movie for me is the song by Duran Duran, the opening song, A View to a Kill. That's probably the highlight of this movie for me. And while there's nothing, in my opinion, that's particularly terrible about this movie, it's just, for a good chunk of it, just really dull. It felt like they were just going through the motions and not trying to do anything particularly interesting or new with this movie. Parts of the final act were a bit more exciting. It was a little more decent in the final act, which kind of helped this movie for me. But definitely, like, the first act was just a slow burn for me. And as pretty much everybody who talks about this movie says, Roger Moore is probably too old in this movie to be playing Bond. He was about 57, I believe, when they were filming this, and he's definitely looking quite a bit older. And I do think it would have been okay had they, like at the start of the movie, maybe acknowledged Bond's getting older and maybe have played into that with this story, make it like a one last mission sort of thing. He's older, not able to fight as well as he used to, so it sort of raised the stakes for Bond himself. I think in the promotional stuff for this movie, when I look back at it, I think it even said, "Is this too much for Bond?" or something like that. So I think if they played into that a bit more with Bond being older now, it could have worked. But when they don't really even acknowledge it, it doesn't work, and things just seem kind of awkward to watch because there's the Bond woman in this, and when they're being romantic, and there's a significant age difference, it feels kind of awkward to watch. And the Bond woman in this movie herself, for me, wasn't very good. She was forgettable overall in the performance. I didn't think was all that great. Roger Moore himself, while definitely getting too old, again, he was given a good performance in this movie. Christopher Walken as Maxwell Zorn, the villain in this, I thought he was given a good performance, but like a lot of things in this movie, just his character was forgettable. Like, when I look back of the Bond villains, I never remember his villain because of what the villain was doing or who he was. I always remember, oh yeah, there's that one villain that Christopher Walken played. So that was disappointing. The henchwoman was alright in this. Mayday, she was alright. She had like a physical threat to Bond, which was good. And at the end, she sort of turns to work with Bond, and I thought that worked. For me, it did. It worked better than when Jaws became good in Moonraker, because that was just goofy. In this one, it made sense, at least more sense, why she was doing that. So that, I thought, worked. I thought she was a better part of this movie. And like I said, the final act I thought was alright. When they're in this like cave, when the villain's getting ready to, blow the place up to destroy Silicon Valley, I enjoyed the stuff in there. Partly, I just thought the set was really good. Like, it's nothing beautiful or anything, but I just thought they did a good job with the set. Like, it looked really good. Kind of remind me of some stuff from like Temple of Doom. But that sequence I thought was pretty good. And then the final confrontation, when they're fighting on top of the Golden Gate Bridge, I thought that was alright. It was pretty good, and definitely one of the better things of this movie. I did think a lot of the action in this was hurt because the stunt doubles I found to be a lot more noticeable in this movie. And I think out of all the Bond films, I think the stunt doubles were the most noticeable in this film. And there are times when they weren't really hiding their faces to not show that it's not Roger Moore. So that did bring like all the action down, when it just makes it less believable when you can clearly see that's not Roger Moore. And they didn't seem to really be hiding that it's not. So that did weigh a lot of the action down. And another thing, I fine compared to other Bond films. There's not a lot of action in this, which isn't always bad. Goldfinger, I think, is one of the best Bond films, and there's actually not much action in that. The problem with this one compared to Goldfinger's just what the movie is. It's pretty dull. Like, the first act, like I said, was a slow burn for me, when Bond's just pretending to be this guy who's interested in horses and, you know, buying some horses from Zorn, and they're at this estate. That whole section was just, I'm just watching, I'm like, yeah, okay, we're doing this. It got more interesting in the latter half of the movie. It still wasn't great, but it was more interesting. But that first half I just found to be, or at least the first act anyway, to be a real slow burn. And they do try and put some action in there, which is alright. And I know sort of like midway through, maybe a bit more than midway, they threw in like a really like campy chase on a fire truck, which was alright. They sort of went back to that Roger Moore goofiness that some of his movies are known for. And it felt off in this movie because there were times when it felt like they were going a bit more serious, and then there are other times when they had that, when they went goofy, and it's like, I think if they had a bit more of this seriousness and went into the fact that he was an older Bond movie, like older Bond, like I mentioned at the start of this review, I think that could have been interesting, because even the darker Bond films have fun to them, and it's like, you don't have to go full dark, just a bit more serious, like really feel like the stakes for Bond himself are raised because he's older. I think had they done that, that would have been interesting, because it was, you could not hide that Roger Moore wasn't a young man anymore in this. So those are my thoughts on A View to a Kill. For me, it was just a pretty dull movie. The final act did pick it up a little bit, but overall pretty dull and forgettable. It just felt like they're going through the motions on this one. The acting was good. The characters themselves, though, were kind of weak for me. And again, I think had they actually acknowledged Roger Moore's Bond was getting older and played into that and sort of raised the stakes for Bond himself, that could have been interesting, but they didn't. That's fine. So yeah, unfortunately for me, I think this is the weakest of the Roger Moore films, so I'm disappointed he had to go out on a low note. For me, I would give A View to a Kill a 48%. And like I said, I don't think it's terrible. There's nothing in this movie that I think is really terrible. It's just dull and forgettable, unfortunately. But I do know there are plenty of people who do actually really like this movie, and that's great if you do. And if you do, be sure to let me know why you like it, or if you don't like it, let me know why. Just leave your thoughts on this movie. As well, be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel, and stay tuned for some more reviews coming soon. I'm hoping to have a review out for Day Shift coming out soon, so stay tuned for that. And until then, take care, everybody.